More than any other instrument, we as guitar players are kind of obsessed with the pentatonic scale. And I mean, with how much these guys have used it, it's not really a big surprise. But what I want to show you today is that by simply returning a couple of notes to their rightful place, you'll get an even more useful and expressive tool. Hey, Editing Andrew here. Sorry to interrupt the video, but at the very last minute, I decided I wanted to try a little experiment. I've seen that some of you guys prefer fretboard diagrams with the nut over on the left. So as a test for this video, I've gone ahead and flipped them. Please let me know in the comments if you prefer them this way or the way that I normally do them. All right, that's it, back to the lesson. So I think a lot of guitar players kind of learn this stuff in backwards order. The first scale shape that they'll ever actually learn is the pentatonic scale, and not the scale that the pentatonic scale actually comes from. So in Western music, the pentatonic scale comes from the major scale. The major scale is a 7-note scale, and we just remove 2 notes from that 7-note scale to create a 5-note scale, which we call the pentatonic scale. Now, the notes that we remove from that major scale are pretty important. So let's start by giving every note in our major scale a number. These are called scale degrees. So starting on the first note here, we will play a C major scale. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, before resolving back on the 1. Same note that we started on. Now, to turn this into a pentatonic scale, we need to remove both of the half-step intervals from this scale. Those are the ones that are only 1 note apart. So that's this one here and this one here. So we will be removing notes 4 and 7. And now we have this. Now that covers the major pentatonic scale. Next, we're going to talk about the minor pentatonic scale. So that comes from the natural minor scale. So if I were to play an A minor scale right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 1. Again, we just remove those half-step intervals. In this case, we are removing notes 2 and 6, and we end up with this. Okay, so I only showed you that so that you could understand a little bit of the theory that's going on in the background. Now we need to take a look at the 2 most commonly used pentatonic shapes, because these are the shapes that I'm going to show you how to modify. So shape number 1 will be this A minor pentatonic scale. Now, if that is the only scale shape you know, that's totally fine. You only have to use this one if you want, but I am going to show you a second one in case you've learned it as well. For this one, I'm going to show you the C major pentatonic scale shape. Okay, now the reason I didn't show you the A major pentatonic shape and I showed you the C major pentatonic shape instead is because A minor and C major are relative keys. Every single minor scale or minor key has a relative major scale or major key. And these relative scales share all the same notes. In this case, A minor and C major are relative scales. And that also goes for the pentatonic scale. So A minor pentatonic and C major pentatonic are both relative scales. So they contain all of the exact same notes. It's the same scale, they're just starting at a different point in the scale. The easiest way to figure out these relative major and minor scales is to go back to that standard minor pentatonic scale shape, and whichever note your pointer finger is on right here is your relative minor, and whichever note your pinky finger is on here, that is your relative major. So in this case, that is an A note, A minor, and this note right here is a C note, C major. That means that A minor and C major are the exact same key, the exact same scale, share all the same notes, all the same chords in those keys as well. And that's also why the 2 pentatonic scale shapes I showed you are connected to one another, right here. It's important to note that if I shifted these scale shapes into a different position, I would then be playing in a different key. The shapes themselves would not change, but wherever that first finger, my pointer finger landed, whatever note that was, that would always be my relative minor, and wherever that pinky was, that'll always be my relative major. All right, so before we start messing with this scale and adding things to it, let's quickly just take a step back and talk about why the pentatonic scale is so great as is. Firstly, when it comes to the guitar, these scale shapes are very beginner friendly. A big reason for this is because they are only 2 notes per string. So when you are learning how to pick, you're not having to change up your down-up picking pattern because it alternates between maybe 2 or 3 notes on each string. Another thing, and this is one of the reasons why the pentatonic scale is so widely used, and even why after you learn a whole bunch more scales, you're still gonna come back and use the pentatonic scale, and that is that it is very agreeable in just about any musical context. Not only has the pentatonic scale existed in cultures all over the world at all different points in history, it actually predates the major scale. We only say that the pentatonic scale comes from the major scale because it's an easier way to explain it and understand it in the context of Western music. So ultimately, it sounds good, it's easy to play, and it's easy to use. However, I believe that the beauty of the pentatonic scale really shines when you're actively choosing to use it in a particular moment rather than being limited to it. So that is why I think it is so important to flesh these pentatonic scale shapes out so that you have the full major and minor scales. Now, if you've been following along up to this point, that just means adding back that 4th and 7th scale degree so that our pentatonic scale becomes a major scale again. So this is pretty simple, and the shape itself is not really gonna change very much. We're just adding a couple notes to what is already there. So if we go back to that A minor pentatonic scale shape, our new shape, which is now just an A minor scale, is going to look like this. And because of the way that relative scales work, not only is that an A minor scale, that is also its relative major scale, which is a C major scale. If I played that same shape, but I started that scale on the C note instead of the A note, I would be playing a C major scale. If you listen to this. Now for the second shape, the standard major pentatonic scale shape, we are going to add those notes back to that one as well. And now this shape is going to look like this. And not only is this a C major scale, this is also an A minor scale. If I were to start this scale from an A note, it would be A minor. All right, so what is the actual benefit and use of these 2 more fleshed out scale shapes? Well, firstly, they sound a lot less boxy because a lot of the strings actually have 3 notes on each string rather than just the 2. But more importantly, what this gives you is access to every allowable note. So we call these our diatonic notes. These are all the notes that exist naturally inside of a key. So when I'm playing in the key of A minor, or I'm playing a chord progression in the key of C major, the notes that I'm allowed to play in and around those chords that'll always sound nice and good are the notes from the corresponding major or minor scale. Now you could play the corresponding major or minor pentatonic scale, but then you're just leaving those 2 extra notes on the table. It's gonna be better to actually have those extra notes at your disposal. This is especially the case when you are writing songs, writing licks, writing melodies, or when you are learning how to improvise your own solos. I'll just quickly give you an off-the-cuff example of the difference between the pentatonic scale and the full 7-note major or minor scale. I'll play an A minor chord here, and then I'll play some notes from the pentatonic scale. All right, I'm gonna play the A minor chord again, but this time I'm gonna follow it up with notes from the full 7-note scale. All All right, so the difference here musically is not massive, but I do think it's important for you to learn these fleshed out shapes so that you have the choice to be able to play the major/minor scale, or if you want something more pentatonic-y, more boxy, you can play the pentatonic scale. Almost everything you'll ever learn in Western music does stem from the major scale, and that's one of the reasons I think these shapes are so foundationally important to learn. So once you've got the hang of these two new scale shapes, it's time to actually put them to work and start making music. And one of the best ways that you can do this is by learning how to improvise guitar solos. So I've got a lesson called Improvising Guitar Solos for Complete Beginners. I'm gonna put it up in the middle of the screen for you now if you do wanna check it out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.